Okay, tonight we're going to be taking a look at Tradition 6. An AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. The roots of this tradition are found in some abject failures of the original groups, things that they tried to do which were directly contrary to this tradition, which did not work, which failed miserably. The roots of this tradition also found back in the experiences of the Washingtonians in the 1800s. This was a group that was formed to bring sobriety to large numbers of people, and they were quite successful at first, especially successful in attracting members. By the time the Washingtonians had been around for about 6 years, they were approached by the abolitionist movement, and they embraced abolition, that is, abolition of slavery, which was a political movement. It was also staunchly promulgated by some of the churches, so there were religious overtones to it. And they also embraced the cause of temperance. There was a political party called the Prohibitionist Party, and they became spokesmen for the Prohibitionist Party, and threw the full weight of the Washingtonian Society behind the Prohibitionist movement. They were not affiliating with the concept or an idea, they affiliated themselves with an actual political party. And shortly thereafter, the Washingtonians collapsed. They just simply disappeared. In the early days of AA, the original members of this fellowship were, by and large, pretty much promoters. They were people who had been idealists in the sense they had great ideals for what they wanted to be and what they wanted to accomplish, and that they were going to they were going to save the world. They were going to be highly recognized, and none of this, of course, had come to pass. They were people who had a defect. They were drinkers, and they also had huge egos, most of them, and pride, and they failed. Well, when AA got going, they got really, really pumped up. And they were right in many respects. Their thesis was that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous would solve the problems of the world, and that it was of universal application to all men and women. Now that part is true. The 12 steps are for everybody. They're not the exclusive province of AA, which is being proven over and over again now in hundreds of different ways. Just a simple example is the Al-Anon family groups. And these people are not alcoholics. They're the loved ones and the spouses and close friends of alcoholics. They themselves are not dealing with the disease of alcoholism, and yet the 12 steps work fine for them. They work beautifully. And of course we know of all the other 12-step groups that are around now. They're all over the place. So they were right about that. The 12 steps are spiritual principles. They are of universal application to all human beings, as you would expect. A spiritual principle which has been originates with our higher power, with God, is going to apply across the board to all humans. But they wanted to extend this concept. Now let's see what they wanted to do and what they tried to do. The moment we saw that we had an answer for alcoholism, it was reasonable, or so it seemed at the time, for us to feel that we might have the answer to a lot of other things. The AA groups, many thought, could go into business, might finance any enterprise whatever in the total field of alcoholism. In fact, we felt duty-bound to throw the whole weight of AA name behind any meritorious cause. Here are some of the things that we dreamed. Hospitals didn't like alcoholics, so we thought we'd build a hospital chain of our own. People needed to be told what alcoholism was, so we'd educate the public, even rewrite school and medical textbooks. We'd gather up derelicts from Skid Rows, sort out those who could get well, and make it possible for the rest to earn their livelihood in a kind of a quarantine confinement. Concentration camp, in other words. And they would perform a triage to see which ones, in their considered judgment, would be able to make it in AA, and the rest would be simply cared for. Maybe these places would make large sums of money to carry on other good works. We seriously thought of rewriting the laws of the land and having it declared that alcoholics are sick people. No more would they be jailed. Judges would parole them into our custody. We would split AA into the dark regions of dope addiction and criminality. We would form groups of depressive and paranoid folks. The deeper the neurosis, the better we liked it. It stood to reason that if alcoholism could be licked, so could any problem. Well, that is true. But the mistake they made was thinking that they could be the instrument. It occurred to us that we could take what we had into the factories and cause laborers and capitalists to love each other. Our uncompromising honesty might soon clean up politics. With one arm around the shoulder of religion and the other around the shoulder of medicine, we'd resolve their differences. Having learned to live so happily, we'd show everybody else how. Why we thought our Society of Alcoholics Anonymous might prove to be the spearhead of a new spiritual advance. We might transform the world. Yes, we of AA did dream these dreams. How natural that was, since most alcoholics are bankrupt idealists. Nearly every one of us had wished to do great good, perform great deeds, and embody great ideals. We were all perfectionists who failed perfection, had gone to the other extreme and settled for the bottle and the blackout. Providence, through AA, had brought us within reach of our highest expectations. So why shouldn't we share our way of life with everyone? Whereupon, we tried AA hospitals. They all bogged down because you cannot put an AA group into business. Too many busybody cooks spoil the broth. AA groups had their fling in education, and when they began to publicly whoop up the merits of this or that brand, people became confused. Did AA fix drunks, or it was an educational project? Was AA spiritual, or was it medical? Was it a reform movement? In consternation, we saw ourselves getting married to all kinds of enterprises, some good and some not so good. Watching alcoholics committed willy-nilly to prisons or asylums, we began to cry, there ought to be a law. AAs commenced to thump tables in legislative committee rooms and agitated for legal reform. That made good newspaper copy, but little else. We saw we'd soon be mired in politics. Even inside AA, we found imperative to remove the AA name from clubs and 12-step houses. These adventures implanted a deep-rooted conviction that in no circumstances could we endorse any related enterprises, no matter how good. We of Alcoholics Anonymous could not be all things to all men, nor should we try. Now, of course, one of the things we've been discussing for the last 5 weeks is the absolute applicability of these traditions to our own personal lives and our own personal recovery. Now, let's see where this tradition applies to us individually as well as to our groups and to the fellowship as a whole. Well, one thing that's becoming painfully obvious is that most of us have a very, very difficult time trying to serve two masters. That is, we try to be good AA members, we try to live up to our responsibility of carrying this message to other alcoholics without any expectation of any kind of return, offering unconditional love, at the same time that we go out and get degrees and get licenses to work in addiction and alcoholism field as counselors. And it's very difficult to handle both sides of that coin. Many people who try it fall flat on their swords and get very sick, and they suffer for a long time before they finally slip. It seems that unless we are unusual people who can completely divorce these two aspects of our lives so that they don't conflict at all, that we run into a dilution. On the one hand, we cannot be that effective as counselors, and on the other hand, we lose our spiritual fitness. One of the things that happens in doing that is that we suddenly have an agenda. We have people we must answer to. We have certain protocols and lesson plans and methodologies we must use when we're getting paid for it. The worst thing is that instead of being willing to let God be the final judge, and instead of letting God be the solution, we begin to feel responsible that people we work with and take money for get sober. In other words, we're no longer willing to let God have His way. And of course the people we work for wouldn't see it that way at all. They're going to want us to have quotas. They're going to be counting noses, see how many people we have worked with who did not relapse, and so on and so on. There are lots of opportunities, of course, for us to bugle the AA name around, to bugle our own participation in AA, especially those of us who have been around a long time. And that's a temptation that we must stay away from. Because there are plenty of businesses out there, plenty of government agencies and charities that would love to have the implied imprimatur of AA to go along with all the other stuff that they feel makes them unique or different or valuable. So we cannot be sucked into that. We dare not allow our name or the name of our group or the name of our fellowship to be associated with anything other than AA groups themselves, AA as a whole. Because we can't abide it. It's something which tears us apart. Now there are examples right here in southern Florida of just how difficult this business can be. For example, you notice that they had decided early on, this was written in, the traditions were written in 1946, 1947. By that time, they had decided that AA clubs could not be any part of AA and would not be allowed to use the name AA or Alcoholics Anonymous. That they had to be separately incorporated and separately operated, and although they might have on their board all members of AA, they may even, as a matter of internal policy, deny membership in the club to anyone who wasn't a member of AA. They could not advertise themselves or hold themselves out to be AA. The same thing was true of what Bill was calling here 12-step houses. Sometimes we call them three-quarter-way houses or halfway houses, commercial enterprises. But there's another problem in South Florida, and that is what are known as 12-step groups. Now, a 12-step group operates much like a club, but is not a club. It is not separately incorporated. Pompano Beach Group is a 12-step group, but it does not have any commercial endeavor. It doesn't sell anything except the books at cost. It doesn't have a coffee bar. Doesn't have books for sale or anything like that. But many of the 12-step groups have half their income coming from those kinds of activities. As a consequence, they pile up significant amounts of money. The Cole Room, Sunset Room, South Dade Room, and others in Dade County. I don't know of any here. There may be some. They use the name AA. They are an AA group, and yet they're in business. And I have to tell you, they have a lot of trouble. A lot of them collapse because of it, because they accumulate a lot of money, far more than they need. And they build up a big war chest. And then they have business meetings which tear your head off. I mean, they go on for an hour and a half of terrible wrangling and calling each other names and just tremendous emotionalism and big fights over elections and electioneering and the whole shot. And if you want to look at what's going on there, really it's about money, control of money, control of how the money is to be spent, and what we're going to do next to make more money. Now, we found out, and in next week we're going to look at this in specificity. An AA group ought to be poor. We must depend upon our higher power. If we have a group, we will depend upon the fact that our expenses will be met. And if we're not meeting our expenses, then we're not doing a job. If we're not meeting our expenses, something is wrong with the way we're presenting our meetings, or something's wrong, and there's a problem there. And so we depend upon God, just as you and I depend on God in our private lives and our personal recovery. Now, a lot of people have taken up the cudgel for a prudent reserve, which is, in terms of an AA group, is an oxymoron. We don't have any need for prudent reserves. Not at all. We are self-supporting through our own contributions, and if the contributions fail to pay the rent, we better pony up the money some way. That's almost never going to happen. The problem with prudent reserves is that they have a tendency to grow. They're kind of like a fungus. It starts out with $1,500 and it ends up as $40,000. And now everybody is fighting over who's going to control that money. So we have to be very careful not to engage in business, not to engage in any outside activities, and in no way ever to allow the AA name to be attached to anything other than AA itself. That's the essence of the sixth tradition. Who'd like to share, please? Sir.
I'll call it. My name's Pat. It sounded to me when you were talking about those of us in the program who struggle with trying to go into counseling or whatever. If we accept that as a spiritual solution, not a human solution, I realize that there's conflict if you go into the counseling side of it. You know, you can't really you can't separate the two if you truly accept the spiritual solution portion of the program. It seems to me, I don't know, I haven't been aspiring to be a counselor by any means, you know, but for those who do, it would seem like, to me, you have to fall on the fence one way or the other.
Some people are able to do it very well, but it's definitely a juggling act. It's necessary to have two separate approaches. We're getting paid for a job over here, we'll do it the way they say. Over here, we're following God's rule and God's plan that we carry His message. Therefore, whatever the treatment center message may be, that's just a job. If we look at it from the standpoint that we would look at selling insurance or mortgages or pumping gas, we're following the rules of that particular business. We take their money, we agree to follow those rules. We must never confuse the two or think that we're doing 12-step work when we're doing work which requires of us two things. One, that we promulgate a human solution, and two, that we take credit for recovery where we have an agenda, where we have we're going to be putting notches in our belt, and people are going to be watching us to see how successful we are. The two are antithetical. We can't combine them. Some people are able to do that. The ones who can't do that have a lot of trouble. And when they fall big time. Make sense?
A lot of people that are in the counseling business come from AA.
And what?
A lot of people in counseling got their foundation from AA.
Yep.
And I don't know, I think I had my life saved by a lady that came through AA.
Mm-hmm.
And the big book says that what the hell does it say? About you cannot keep what you have unless you give it away.
Right.
But she didn't give it away because she was getting paid for it.
Right. That isn't anything to do with your recovery. That only to do with her recovery. What she gave you may have saved your life. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about what's happening with her. What's the rule? Bill said it in his story. The alcoholic failed to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. He couldn't survive. Their rules never change. And 12-step work is never done for a profit, never done with the expectation of any return whatsoever. And we're sharing what we have. And some people have a lot to share and some don't. But nevertheless, if we've got one day sober, we've got something that the new person doesn't have. Look what happened in Cleveland. Remember, Tom? In Cleveland, when the Plain Dealer published that series of articles, 7 articles in a week about AA, and they only had about 15 members in that group. And all of a sudden they began to get requests from everywhere. And the members of the group figured, well, we'll handle this. Within a couple of days they realized that they couldn't. They'd been going out and they'd been bringing people in. And it was their opinion that these new people there'd be nothing they could do to help the new person. But in desperation, they sent somebody, came in yesterday, out to talk to somebody today. They looked up and here they came traipsing back, bringing a new person in tow with them. They were having just as much success in rounding up the newcomers as the old timers had been. They learned a valuable lesson from that. There's no limitation on God's working through us if we're willing to put ourselves out there. And there's a certain percentage of people to whom the miracle has been given, and all they need is the encouragement to take a look at it, and the new person can do that. So we have something to offer as soon as we have accepted the proposition that we're alcoholics and that we need help. That's a major something to offer. We don't try to give something that we don't have, of course. That would be foolish. But once we have worked the steps and if we've got the big book and we're willing to read and to study, we've got plenty to offer. And this does not mean that we have a world of experience, but it does mean that we know the mechanics of working these steps, we know the mechanics of using these tools, and we can help somebody else to do exactly what we did. And they may be right behind us, a month behind us in recovery. They may even surpass us once the steps kick in with them, but we're not going to worry about that. We know that when we're giving away what we've got, whatever that may be, we are promoting and promulgating our own recovery, big time, big time. There isn't any way that we can substitute any other activity for carrying the message. And we think we're doing it. People tell us we're doing it, and they tell us that when we empty ashtrays and make the coffee, that somehow or another it's equivalent to carrying the message. I mean, it doesn't even make sense to say that, because carrying the message is a spiritual requirement, a spiritual principle embodied in the steps. Emptying ashtrays is not. These activities on behalf of the groups or the fellowship are excellent, and they certainly aid and abet the requirement of unity. But they have almost nothing to do with promulgating and perfecting our spiritual life, which is what we must do. Ultimately, without that, we fall. Does that make sense? Who's next?
Fascinating.
Well, we might all meditate for a few minutes if you like. Yes, Chris?
My name's Chris. I'm here for recovering alcoholic.
You're good.
What you're saying about treatment centers and people coming from the program into treatment centers. I'm fresh in the program, and what I saw a perfect example of my experience with a particular person that I know I was becoming kind of close to was a drug counselor. And what I saw happen was their successes in their field were immediately taken away from their work in 12-step work. Okay, this person I wouldn't extend his hand at all to me. Okay, and he was writing this plane based on his success in the treatment center. And exactly what you said, the result was relapse. And it's kind of like, kept trying to mention, this person kind of had this theory at some point that he didn't need a sponsor anymore. Because of his successes at work, that he was above sponsorship. And I really hope that I never get to that, or have that idea, because I know that it was a very miserable situation for him. I know that I've got to work with steps on a daily basis, extend my hand, give out the phone number to somebody. Because what I noticed too for me is that when I extend my hand, this person somebody calls me. It might not be the most opportune moment, but it's always the right moment. It just pulls me out of myself regardless of what's happening. It changes my whole attitude as to what's going on. Thanks for letting me share.
Well, for years I used to carry the steps into treatment centers. The last one, I finally gave it up. This last one, I was there for about a year, and it was an adjunct. It was by the way. My hour they called education hour, and the counselors used that for the hour they would call people in for their counseling. And I squawked about that, and I tried to get them to change it. They promised they would, but they never did. So finally, I said, hell with this. The 12 steps are the recovery, and everything else you're doing around here is a bunch of crap. They didn't much like that either. But every treatment center has figured out that their recidivism rate is 100% if they don't have some AA involved in their program. In 1970, the care center started, when they got government funded, for 3 years, they had a strictly psychological gestalt. I don't know what else. They used all that the psychobabble, and nobody stayed sober. Nobody. They finally figured out that they had to have AA, so they started inviting AA meetings in. Then they started to get some recovery, and all the other treatment centers have figured this out. But it's still an adjunct to their human solution program, because after all, and it's only natural, the people who are in there as counselors and doctors and psychiatrists and so forth, they got all their training with human solution stuff. And if they were to suddenly say, well, anything we do here is just sort of futile unless you get a spiritual program, what the hell good is their training? If they look around, they look at AA and they see people coming into AA with no human solutions at all, just embracing the program, getting sober, staying sober. Got to make them wonder, what the hell am I doing here? Why did I spend all this time? Well, there's one good answer to it. It's a good ticket to have. You can make a living doing it. And if you are truly centered spiritually, you can be a lot of help. But only if you're willing to separate the two out, because what happens is that in private counseling, for example, you can urge people to get to AA meetings. You can urge the staff and the director to bring in more meetings or take people to more meetings. There are all kinds of stuff you can do if you're willing to push the AA program, knowing that everything else is pretty much of a vain effort. It can be a lot of fun, and it's a pretty good profession to have, and it'll be very helpful to people who are not chronic alcoholics or chronic addicts. Now, a lot of people go through treatment centers that what they need is a pat in the back. What they need is to get some self-esteem, because they're not actually powerless over alcohol or drugs. And there are a lot of people in the treatment centers just like that. And for them, it can be very helpful. But the human solutions never worked. As far as I can see, they never will work. But the spiritual solution always works and never fails. So why would we mess around with anything else? Who's next? Hey, Gus.
You know, it gets down, as you were reading it, it's down to the basic core. It's about our motives. You know, you're saying, just like it says in the big book, or self-centeredness is our problem. You're right, I've been through, before I got sober this last time, quite a few treatment centers, and there was a fine line, like you said. There are people that can do it, but we're all human, most of us are human, and we confuse both. And I think I've been in regular business meetings where, like you said, it's a tremendous it really gets down to ego. It gets in the way. The money is a substitute for our ego, our motives. What is our primary purpose in this fellowship? Is to stay sober and help another alcoholic to try to get sober. But even myself, when I if I say to my own personal life, imagine the conflict I feel. You know how a group works. I mean, got 15 different opinions, and it's very difficult. And when it's just an amazing thing, because I'm getting a little bit more personal than this tradition, but I've seen people leave meetings over resentments, over group policy, if I can call it that, the direction of the groups, this is a great tradition that keeps us out from this stuff. Just like one of the traditions that we have one ultimate authority. And I think I could get it in my personal life. So imagine in a group.
Right.
So
Okay, thank you, Gus. Well, guys, let's close this down so they can go ahead and get their dance going. Tonight we're going to be looking at tradition 7. Very, very, very important tradition. Before we get started with that, let's have a moment of silence and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you, Saint Prayer. To accept the counting, neither opposes any cause. Our primary purpose is to stay sober, help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Traditionalist group to read a portion of chapter 5. And look to that. Okay, Bishop.
To take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to prepare us to be out of sin. Pray open all to will. I'll conquer that. 12. Have principles in all our affairs. Many of us explain what in order. I can't go through with it. Do not be serious. Someone has been maintaining and working adherence to these principles. Point is that we really go off for one. The principles are certain of the
Thank you, Pat. No, we hear this repeated at most meetings in accordance with our 7th tradition. But we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean that we're self-supporting, declining outside contributions? It rolls trippingly off the tongue. But there must be something behind all of this. Why would we not want to accept contributions from people out there who could well afford it, who know what kind of wonderful work we're doing, and who want to help financially? Why is it that we're saying we don't take your contributions, we're self-supporting? You know, there's an amazing tie-in, as we've discussed before in this meeting, between these traditions and what we must do as a group, and principles that we apply in our own individual lives, especially as this relates to our sobriety and our spiritual growth. To be self-supporting, to go away from the old habits we had, the old survival techniques we had of becoming dependent on others or making them dependent on us, mooching, manipulating, finding some way to get others to pay our way, being angry when they wouldn't. The whole idea of being self-supporting to our own contributions, to our own lives, as well as self-supporting as a group, was something that we stayed away from, many of us. We needed a whole lot more money in the last days than we actually were able to accumulate or to earn. Many of us had no earning capacity at all. Many of us turned to crime to supplement our income, to support our habits. But now we've got a wholly different perspective on this. That in our personal lives and in our corporate life, that is, as a fellowship, we are to be self-supporting to our own contributions. We are, in other words, to take total responsibility for what happens to us. Recognizing that our problems have and always had been of our own making, and that if our group is going to have problems, we will be making those problems as a group. And it's going to center around selfishness and self-centeredness. It's going to center around acquisitiveness and the desire to have something for nothing. And then there's another factor that enters into this big time. Suppose we were to follow the footsteps of every other eleemosynary or charitable group out there, to seek contributions wherever we could find them, to feed off the government, to go to the private foundations, to write proposal letters, to seek to raise money wherever we could. We wouldn't have any difficulty. Our story is one of enormous success, and we're fulfilling a need within our society which is perhaps second to none. If you were to go into any prison and get the stories, look at the dossiers of the people in that prison, you're going to find inevitably that over 90% of those people who are in there have alcohol or drugs in their story, in one form or another. And here we are at the forefront, on the firing line of life, and 65 years ago there were 2 of us, and now there are over 5 million. Think about it. It's a success story beyond belief. And all of this time, we've never asked any money from anybody except in the real early days when they went to Rockefeller and asked him to put up some dough. The word came back, you guys got to finally figure out you got to stand on your own 2 feet. Now, we're going to put up $5,000 to help you with your publication of your book, but that's it. Now, the Rockefellers could easily have financed everything that early group wanted to do and pay out enormous salaries to executive directors and board members who would suddenly become wealthy, feeding at the trough of public largesse. But something happened. These guys realized that with money comes strings. With money comes dependency on money. With money comes control. And for alcoholics, with money comes internal conflict. And one of the most vicious things that happens to an AA group is to accumulate too much money. We don't know how to deal with that. So the concept, which was utterly unique, and I guess in most respects still is, was that an AA group ought to be poor. That there's absolutely no need to accumulate money. That we're being self-supporting, we will support ourselves on a current basis. That we do not need to accumulate into large sums. One of the modern day myths floats around this business of a Prudent Reserve. Prudent Reserve comes out of New York. Now, that's a separate corporation, and they've got a business to run. We're not a business. Although, of course, there are some so-called 12-step groups, not I know of in this county, but in Dade County, that are in business. In business big time. They're not corporations. They're not tax-exempt charitable organizations. They're not religions. They're just a group of people, unincorporated association doing business. And they put together a lot of money because of it, and then they fight like hell over that money. Major warfare causes more trouble in those groups than anything else. A business meeting will be, in many cases, an hour of acrimony. Much of it centered around how to spend the surplus funds or how to make more money. And many groups simply expire over this. They fall on their swords and they're out of business. I've watched that happen 3 times within the last 4 or 5 years. So it is traditional for us to remain poor. Now, there's a spiritual principle involved here. That if we are serving a purpose, that is, if we're carrying God's message, and if that purpose is being served and people are being helped, then we don't have to worry about having enough money to pay the rent. We cannot give in to fears, and economic fears are just as bad as any other fears, in some cases worse than. What's one of the fears that we attack in our 4-step and in our 5th step, which is so prevalent? Fear of economic insecurity. But think about it from this standpoint. The only way that a group goes broke and doesn't have any money to pay its rent is when the group is falling apart, when nobody really cares anymore. The other thing is, if we're going to bring people in and teach them to trust God, hadn't we better be consistent in doing that ourselves? People will say in a business meeting, well, what if we don't have any money for 3 months? How can that be? What, are you out of business? Nobody's coming to meetings anymore? If nobody's coming to meetings, what the hell are you trying to pretend that you're a group for? If they're coming to meetings, you're going to have plenty of money to deal with what you need to deal with. What's the purpose of putting $50,000 in the bank? And I've watched groups accumulate that much and more. Not one dime being paid over to New York or to Intergroup. It's deadly. So the tradition is, and the principle is, that we stay poor. We remove from ourselves one of the most damaging temptations we can have, which is to try to deal with large sums of money. Here's what the big book, here's what 12 and 12 says about this on page 160. Self-supporting alcoholics, whoever heard of such a thing? Yet we find that's what we have to be. This principle, notice that the book is telling us that this tradition is a principle, that we're to be self-supporting. This principle is telling evidence of the profound change that AA has wrought in all of us. Everybody knows that active alcoholics scream that they have no troubles money can't cure. Always we have our hands out. Time out of mind, we've been dependent upon somebody, usually money-wise. When a society composed entirely of alcoholics says it's going to pay its bills, that's really news. Probably no AA tradition had the labor pains that this one did. In early times, we were all broke. When you add to this the habitual supposition that people ought to give money to alcoholics who are trying to stay sober, it can be understood why we thought we deserved a pile of folding money. What great things AA would be able to do with it. But oddly enough, people who had money thought otherwise. They figured that it was high time that we, now sober, paid our own way. So our fellowship stayed poor because it had to. You know, power driving, ego enhancement, big shotism, all of these things are pretty much common attributes of the alcoholic and the drug addict. And one of the things that we're doing to reduce that through our traditions is to stay humble financially. There's something else, of course, that's going on here too. We are going to recover financially. Personally. What does the big book say in chapter 9? That financial recovery always follows spiritual recovery, never precedes it. And the same thing is going to be true of a group. The group that is keeping itself spiritually fit by following these traditions is a group that will have all the financial backbone that it needs to survive. And that's all we need to do is survive. Remember, and when we get to 12th tradition, we're going to get into this in some detail. The 12th tradition tells us that anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. And the purpose of the 12th tradition hasn't anything whatsoever to do with keeping the fact of our alcoholism private. It has only to do with the the basic principle of self-sacrifice. And this goes directly to our own programs as well. Remember in Bill's story, he tells us that the only way we can survive the certain low spots ahead is through work and self-sacrifice for others. So the principle of self-sacrifice, that is, that we must sacrifice our own needs, wants and desires for notoriety and acclaim and for position and for power and for that people think kindly of us, that we be accorded medals and honors and honorary doctorates and all that stuff. We have to put all that aside. And for alcoholics, this is tough because our habit is to be power drivers, even though we never really had any power. But the pretenses to power were one of our main things. So we're going to put that aside, and we're going to practice a real humility. We're going to practice self-sacrifice. We're going to keep our last name out of the public arena. We're going to be not faceless, but nameless. Because we need to stay humble. We need to be willing to sacrifice our need for notoriety and acclaim to the common good, to the welfare of the fellowship. So if you read the first tradition, the 12th tradition together, they bookend the traditions. The unity of the fellowship depends in large part upon our willingness to stay anonymous at the public level. Okay, so that's the 7th tradition. Who would like to share about it now?
I'll start. I think that I guess I'm just ready for the traditions because I learned so much that I heard a guy at a meeting recently say that taking the 7th tradition to another level, a personal level, this guy was crying for money or something. I don't remember the details. He said, you are now self-supporting through your own contributions, so get a freaking job. I mean, that was basically his message. And I had like an awakening. Wow. I never thought of these traditions to be like that in my personal life, And it's like,
get a job. What a novel idea.
Get a freaking job. And I stopped crying because I don't know. It never occurred to me that it could be so personal. And this tradition 12 also, anonymity, it means to me in a meeting, I got to shut up and listen to the other guy, even though, whatever he's talking about, I'm very well versed in. I just got to shut up and listen and not be so goddamn smart. That's what the anonymity that I feel that tradition 12 talks about also. I mean, it's just different levels in these traditions. To me, it's amazing. It really is. And that's all I have.
Well, that's right. As soon as you give up trying to be the big shot, as soon as you give up the idea that you're going to be right and everybody else is wrong, so long as they don't agree with you, a lot of this stuff has to do, doesn't it, with being buried in self. A lot of this stuff is symptomatic of selfishness and self-centeredness. So it all goes together. We got a package deal here, and you can't really separate stuff out because all of these different things are part of the package. They're all part of who we are. We're very complex, and yet, strangely enough, we have a very simple program to solve our complexities. And it resolves itself around those things that we do. What we do will determine who we become and how it works for us. Who's next? Let's hear from you, Pat.
My name's Pat. And it occurred to me when we were talking about the 7th tradition here, and I heard about Rockefeller wanting or being asked for the money back then, and we covered the fact that there are always strings attached when somebody invests. Trying to do that myself, find investors, and I know now that they're going to own part of whatever it is I get. That comes with the territory.
Sure.
I can't think otherwise. And I thought initially otherwise, and But the other side of the coin here too, I'm beginning to realize is, you know, I'm putting that money in the basket and I'm helping another alcoholic when I do that.
Sure.
You know, and that's the important part to me, and I think a basic portion of that stuff, I mean, we are self-supporting, and we're helping other alcoholics when we do it. I mean, it's not just, it's not taking somebody else's money because we don't want their strings. It's part of the 12th step.
Sure.
And helping another alcoholic. When I put that money in there, it provides the rent so that I can meet, and then I can get on a committee, and we can do the work we have to do. And that's helping another alcoholic.
Sure.
It's
Those who can put their dough in.
exactly.
You know, it used to be a long time ago. It doesn't work anymore, but it used to be they'd say, put some money in if you can, take some out if you need it. I don't hear that anymore.
No.
There are too many tight-fisted treasurers around these days. But certainly, if we get the idea, as Tom was talking about, that these traditions apply to us personally and to our personal lives and the way we conduct ourselves, it's amazing what a clear, straight parallel there is.
Well, the 12th tradition, if there's one I hear probably misquoted, it's that one.
Oh, sure.
Thinking they're hiding their identity. It's keeping my personality from consuming the meeting. And the meeting and the message of the meeting is more important than my personality or my big shot. And every time I hear somebody share on that one, it's, you know, what you see here, what you hear here, you leave here, don't you tell it. And I think the majority of us in this body really believe that that's what it's about. And when I read about it, that's not what I get. I get the humility. It's
Sure.
a furthering of my humility in order to let God's word come through. And
When you read Bill's writings, if you're interested in the traditions, and I believe we all ought to be, because they're so powerful, and they're spiritual principles that guide our groups and our fellowship. The language of the heart, the whole first section of that book is in large measure devoted to the writings of Bill Wilson respecting the traditions. These writings were principally produced from 1946 through 1948 or 49. The traditions were adopted by the First International in 1950. And Bill was pumping them like crazy. As a matter of fact, in the late 40s, if he was invited to speak, they'd say, Bill, come and speak to our group. But don't say a word about those damn traditions. We're tired of hearing about it. But Bill wouldn't give up. He was a tenacious son of a gun. And you want to know what the background, the history, and the meanings of the traditions, pick up the language of the heart, and it'll really open your eyes. If you haven't done it, I'm not saying you haven't done that, but it certainly opened my eyes when I've got hold of that. And when the book was first published, when was that, in 88, 86, 87, somewhere in there, I was amazed what I found in there, because these are all the collected writings of Bill Wilson for the Grapevine. And he wrote extensively. In fact, the stuff we find in the 12 and 12 is really a condensation, in some cases very poor condensation, of the major articles he wrote about these traditions for the Grapevine. So it's clear from what Bill wrote. Here's his statement. The 12th tradition has to do with self-sacrifice. It is aimed almost entirely at the public, our relationships with the public. It really has nothing to do with our relationship inter se within the group. Look at the 11th tradition. Look at the 10th tradition. I mean, these things. You see, what they were concerned about was that we would be out there pumping ourselves or pumping the fellowship in public, using our full names, grabbing the glory, getting our honorary PhDs, being given make-work jobs just so that the name could be used, selling the name of AA, even if by indirection, by identifying ourselves as members, and that we now endorse this or that. They were scared to death that was what was going to happen. And so those traditions really don't have a thing to do with how we operate within our meetings. It's just become a custom over the last, 20, 30 years to announce ourselves by our first name only in meetings. There's no tradition that says we ought to do that. It just becomes sort of customary. And if you run around, if you go around breaking that custom, you're going to find a lot of people, So it's just too much work to fight that. So that's why I just introduced myself as Jim. I'm an alcoholic. There may be some spiritual significance within the group. It may be that we leave our last names out because we need to reduce our own pride quotient somehow within the group. But I'll tell you, it can be very damaging too, because we seldom know anybody's last name around here. How do you go about getting hold of them if you don't have their number? Now we just carry that. We're always extremists anyway. We carry that to extremes. Yes, Pat?
Yeah, there's a couple of people in my group who always introduce themselves with their last name, and their sobriety is somewhere in the 20s, and the way they explained it to me is exactly what you were talking about. If I were in a hospital, and how are you going to find me? My last name is Blast, and I can tell you that in this meeting, because I need you to be able to find me. If somebody I know is in the hospital and you need to look me up, if there's a real reason for this, there should be, within my group and within this meeting, there should be no real reason for me to hide my last name. And the fellowship, I believe, depends on it outside of this too, for you to know. I write people's group here. I just write their first name and group with their name, and then there's a couple of people I know who put my last name down. That's what they get. And I will do that only if they ask. But I have to do something to find them. I try to find speakers for meetings I'm taking in, and I got Mark. Mark who? I can't figure out who these people are, and I should be able to, and I do. Like I said, I put their home group in now to try to differentiate. But if there was an emergency, whether it's personal or something with the group I'm associated with, I would want you to get in touch with me.
Now, I was over here in the hospital for 17 days last fall, but the people at the front desk and on the telephones they quickly found out who Jim B was. There was a steady stream of people coming in there. Now 1 out of 10 knew my last name, but they found me anyway. Who's next?
I want to ask a question if I may.
Yes, you may.
It applies to this position, but it applies to one, I'm sure. I go to the bottom line frequently. In fact, I happen to be a member for voting purposes, but I very seldom make business meetings because it's nuts. And you got 3 or 4 women who are completely control freaks, and they drive you crazy. But anyway, this coming Saturday, you're going to have some guru come in, and they're taking inventory. This is the way they announced it. They're taking inventory, and the inventory is going to be concerning people who put their personalities before their principles. And this, from GSO, wherever he's from, is going to tell where they're right and where they're wrong. And I'm saying to myself, and this is going to be a 5-hour deal. I'm saying, should I go there and be the devil's advocate? Should I be a ball breaker there? Or should I just let them do whatever they want to do and have this guru tell them, oh, that's not right, you got to do. What is this? Is this normal?
Well, I'll tell you, this whole idea of a group inventory was a brainchild of New York, and they got people there I don't think have much else to do but run around doing that. There's a whole, you send to New York, you get a whole packet about how to do this, and I've been in a couple groups that have done it. I couldn't see that there was very much that was gained from it, but there was one thing that was for sure, it raised all kinds of controversy, all sorts of name calling. I didn't see any value from it at all, personally. And if that were something that we ought to be doing, I believe it would be in the literature somewhere.
So best I stay away then.
I don't think it has any value. You might go to be entertained.
No,
Now there are others that think highly of those group inventories, but My personal reaction is not that they're basically useless.
What does that consist of? I've never heard of that.
Well, the group takes inventory just like the individual takes. It's kind of like a 4-step for the group. Go through to
Really?
see, all the stuff that they do and they don't do, and it mostly matters of opinion. How you can say, I hate Uncle Bill, because you know you hate Uncle Bill, so you can write that down, and you can pray for Uncle Bill, and you can forgive what he did to you, and you get rid of him. Well, how do you go about saying what a group psyche is? You got 17 people, all of whom wish to share their opinion of what that group psyche is all about. It's amazing stuff. There are some things in the inventory. Do you do this, or do you not do this? It's kind of like questions which have an objective answer. But most of the stuff that would have any real value has to do with how the group psyche, how the group actually views itself, and how it deals with newcomers and all that stuff. How it deals with money, and most of it's a matter of opinion, and everybody's got opinions. So I never saw any particular value from it. The bottom line would be, if you're going to do it, there need to be something comes out of it which helps the group grow to do a better job of carrying the message. And I've never seen that happen. I guess maybe it does some places, but I think that stuff is basically a time waster and a bureaucratic time filler. Because there are people sitting around up there in New York, they're wonderful people, but they're wearing green eye shades and they're chained to a desk. They got nothing better to do than think this stuff up. They're the bright-eyed people who came up with living sober. That all came out of New York. And I'm convinced they wrote that book so they could have something to sell to treatment centers. Because it doesn't have anything to do with the big book or the steps. And yet it's lauded as being conference-approved literature. Conference approval doesn't mean much more than that an editorial board approved of something and then it was passed on to the delegates and they approved of it. What about the grapevine? We don't have any problem with the grapevine, and yet the grapevine is not conference approved. Grapevine's a separate corporation. And there's no way in the world that they could get conference approval of all the articles be published every month. So when you pick up the grapevine, you're looking at the private opinions of the people who wrote it. And the selection of the stories and the articles in the grapevine is at the discretion of the editors. So they pick and choose what they want. And the particular philosophy of the editors of the grapevine at any particular time will come shining through the pages. You can see what they'll publish and what they won't publish. That's not AA-approved literature. And so many groups have in their bylaws and so forth that nothing but AA-approved literature can be used. And then they've got 2 grapevine meetings. It doesn't make any sense.
This version of the big book is not a conference approved. It's a text. It has a blank page opposite.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
It's really handy for me trying to learn this book, but none of the money goes to AA, so it is not considered quote unquote conference approved.
Well, you mean the conference did not approve the white pages?
Yeah.
Okay.
They get no money. They get no money. So, and they sell no version of it, but I wanted the version, so it has Bill's original manuscript in it, and
yeah.
I use it as a textbook.
Yeah, there's some pretty good stuff in there.
Yeah, it works for me. But
yeah. Well, you see, it's like we will put the imprimatur of holiness on conference approved, when that's ridiculous. The best meditation book around is 24-hour book, and it's published by Hazelton. And it was written by an AA member, and it was submitted first to AA, but the editorial board, in their infinite wisdom, turned him down. So the guy who wrote it took it to Hazelton, and they published it. It's still the best meditation book around. So far better than the amateurish jobs they did by they got all their buddies and friends to write a one day, you know, and some of the stuff is okay, and some of it's just weak. Some of it's dead wrong.
You're talking about reflections now?
Yeah, some of it's just dead wrong. It's contrary to the Big Book.
You know that in our group, the men's independence group, there's been a lot. I don't get along. I mean, I always get floored when we talk about self-responsibility in the group.
Yeah.
It still hits me like a rock, and that hit me at home. And to get off a little bit of it, in my home group, they have a controversy. It was conference approved. This ain't controversy. And it's amazing. I never knew this. I didn't know the Lord's Prayer is not conference approved.
Of course not.
The chips,
Of course not.
they're not conference approved.
Of course not.
You know, and all this stuff. I mean, you know.
Half of the slogans on the wall are not conference approved.
Exactly.
The Serenity Prayer in its form that we use it is not conference approved. Huh?
Each person that walks in the meeting is conference approved.
You know, you know, and that's the thing. You know, we're getting back to the stuff. You know, the self-responsibility, self-supporting. Where do we take it from here? Because I know it's tearing my group as a whole apart. I mean, there are members who no longer show up, and so forth. And it's conflicting for me because you know, it's like, I didn't know the Lord's Prayer is not conference approved, but most people accept it. There are people, I know there's a meeting in Boca where they have no prayers.
Yeah.
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
I mean, how far do we take? You know, getting back to what we were saying about the sixth tradition, about, you know, it's like, what are our motives here? And like you were saying, you know, I mean, I can babble this, you and I can babble till 4 o'clock in the morning, and it wouldn't be an answer.
Well, you see, most of the format of a meeting is just by custom with that meeting. Now,
Exactly.
keep in mind that it's not a violation of the traditions in this sense. Every AA group is autonomous. You could an AA group could have coochie dancers on one night, bingo party next night, and a Baptist preacher on the third night. If they wanted to, because we're autonomous. That group will not survive. And we don't have to be too concerned. We don't really have to be afraid of these things ruining AA, because alcoholism is a self-cleaning oven. And when we cease to live by the principles, we cease to live. This is not just for us individually. It's the same thing works for groups as well. So you can pretty much sit back and say, okay, it's like Dr. Bob says in the story, if you still think you can beat the game alone, I feel sorry for you. And we can feel sorry for people who simply don't get it. But we don't need to worry about them carrying a deadly disease that's going to infect us either. Anyone else? Any irresistible impulse?
My name is Larry. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Larry.
When I think of it, I've been around in my work as an electrician, construction worker, and I was able to travel. So I went through a lot of different cities, and some of them would mutilate. From all ages. I mean, they had. I went up to Central Service, and they had this Al-Anon in there who was running the show.
Al-Anon was leading the meeting?
It was leading AA. That was when you called up. It was an Al-Anon.
Oh, okay.
And I went up there, and she kind of dismissed this guy in the bar room. I said, well, maybe let me talk to him. You know? But it was just the whole. There were. I understand that Mighty Man went down there one time, and they put her right back. She wanted to proselytize the traditions.
Yeah.
And they put her right back on a train and sent her back. And
Because they didn't want to hear what she had to say?
didn't want to hear anything
Yeah.
about the traditions. You run the way you do it up there, up the north, and we'll run it down here.
Yeah, she really was a big help to Bill in pushing this tradition through, I know. Well, there's some weird stuff going on out there.
There's some different, and not to name names, but about different cities and different meetings I've gone to around the United States. Some of the AA meetings were named after people.
Yeah.
There was a Julia meeting, and she ran the meeting in a controlled way. And in LA there was Clancy's group.
Oh
That
yeah.
kind of thing. And it's,
Still called the Pacific Group though.
no, it isn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But everybody knows it's Clancy's group.
And it just seemed like those are the only. And this thing you brought up about Prudent Reserve, I heard that in Boston, where I come from, and that you just opened my eyes to that.
It's just pure fear, Leonard.
It was fear, right?
That's all. And it's irrational.
Yeah.
Totally irrational. The only reason you would need a prudent reserve is if nobody came to meetings. If nobody's come to meetings, what the hell are you doing here? You've got no group left. No, so much of what is fear-driven is also utterly irrational, and has nothing to do with reality. So what you got? What 31 years next month?
13th.
On the 13th.
February.
That's wonderful, man.
Wow.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
That's where it's going.
Yeah, we're glad you're here, and I hope you enjoyed this meeting.
I do. I like both meetings. Yeah.
Come back. And anyone else got an irresistible impulse, otherwise known as a burning desire? By the way, an irresistible impulse in some states will get you off of a murder rap, you know. So you might want to be practicing your irresistible impulses. All right, let's close the meeting then.
We met here, and I don't know, there were 10 or 15 of us. I was surprised how many people showed up. But we had a little organization meeting. We decided that we wanted to go ahead and do this every Saturday night. And this lady has been the driving force behind the Stairway group. You might think we seem like we're pretty settled in here, like we've been around forever. Not so. I don't know, when did we start? In May, last May. So we haven't even been around here a year yet. But this group is already becoming a mainstay with the intergroup in New York, because we don't hoard our money. We put it out there where it needs to be. And we've had enormous growth. Tonight we're kind of small but mighty tonight. There are a lot of other competing stuff going on out there. But if it had not been for my dear friend, there wouldn't be this group. She was the driving force, and has continued to be so. And also, she is responsible for our wonderful refreshments, and she takes care of our money. And this beautiful, wonderful lady has 22 years. Janine, come on up.
My name is Janine. I'm an alcoholic. I'm not only taking care of the group, I'm taking care of Jim. He's always hungry. You know, it's amazing. I like to congratulate everybody who pick up their medallion. Like she was talking about the rough times. There are rough times in life, but there's good times. You know, they say that it too shall pass. It's amazing. Yesterday, I have a beautiful meeting somewhere else, and we were a bunch of people, and we have a good time. I said to myself, my God, I don't believe that a month, 3 weeks ago, I was very depressed, and I could not get out of it slowly. And with the girls, they get together and they say, hey, we're gonna share her up. We're gonna